Great. Well, I'm first of all, thank you to everyone that's registered. We actually had a really good registration. We threw this together as sort of the first real. Oh, it looks like Dean did join us. Great. Okay, perfect. Yeah, this is our first real webinar for Simeon Cloud. We kind of operate in the shadows in some ways. We don't get out and market very heavily. We're a product that's in high demand, both by enterprises and MSPs, and 90% of our leads come in just through people finding us on Reddit and through the community just talking about us. So for us to actually do a webinar, put on something, it's fairly new to us. So apologize in advance if there's any bugs or kinks through this process, but we're hoping this will be the first of several webinars. We've got a pretty good lineup that we've got in the, I guess, in the roadmap right now, knowing what features we're going to be rolling out in the next 6 to 8 months. That said, I'm going to let Jeff Nevins kind of talk a little bit about just a really quick introduction on why Simeon Cloud is hosting this event, why specifically talking about the CIS benchmarks and controls, and then we'll get into some questions. So Jeff, take it away.
Sure. Thanks, Ian. As many of you know, being existing Simeon Cloud customers, we've long offered the Simeon Baseline, which is about 150 or so best practice configurations that get you started out of the box for a fully functional, secure Azure AD InTune O365 environment. As Microsoft has evolved its best practices and standards and recommendations, these days, everything just points to follow CIS. And so the Simeon Baseline is evolving to be compliant with CIS 2.0 controls and include all of the controls that are required to be CIS 2.0 compliant. And we'll be rolling that out to make available to all of our customers. And you'll be able to reconcile your tenants against that new version of the Simeon Baseline that includes all these additional controls.
Great. And so just a little bit of now that we've kind of explained why Simeon, why CIS, I wanted to make sure everyone in the group that's presenting can give a quick introduction on who they are, why their job's fairly relevant to the conversation today. So let's start with Rich. Rich, if you want to just kind of introduce yourself.
Thanks a lot, Ian. I appreciate it. And thank you for inviting me to join today. It truly is an honor. And so why I'm here today, and I guess relevance is always debatable, but for sort of where I've been and what got me here today is just very fast background. A long time ago, I graduated from Rochester Institute of Technology, or RIT, and I joined Apple Computer right after college and had a really good launch to a technical career. And following that, I ultimately landed at IBM, where I worked in their enterprise software group for most of my career. And that's where I began focusing on cybersecurity. Following IBM, I led a regional security practice, doing security architecture reviews and services projects, a lot in identity management and other areas, which opened my eyes to really challenges in around just basics in the industry. And that led me to CIS. And for my second stint at CIS, and that's why I'm here today. And I appreciate it. Thank you.
Great. Nick, if you want to go.
Yeah, absolutely. Pleasure having me on as well here too. My name is Nick Ross. I'm a VP of product at a MSP out of Long Island, New York, called SourcePass, and I'm also a Microsoft MVP. I have a YouTube channel and blog called T-365, which some of you may know on the call, but effectively, it's all about Microsoft and SMB content. And a lot of that's always been geared around automation and security. So I've been working with Simeon on the baseline for CIS and a lot of that. We'll talk and unpack today about the benchmarks and everything that we're doing there across the Microsoft suite. So pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and if any of you on the call is not subscribed to Nick's channel, it's excellent content. So be sure to do that as well. Derek, if you want to introduce yourself here.
Sure thing. Aloha. My name is Derek Gabriel. I'm the CEO of Ignite Solutions Group. We're a cybersecurity service provider headquartered in Honolulu. We work primarily with small and medium businesses, and everyone's doesn't realize they have shortcomings with their security until they've had an incident, and we are a little bit tired of being the cleanup crew, so we got a little proactive with helping people secure their Microsoft 365 deployments, and that's how we came across the folks at Simeon a while back through a referral. They were on the, I think, Jeff, you were on the cyber call, and talked about how it's important to sort of come up with a baseline set of controls. And the truth is, like, that also fit in with what we were doing. We pray at the Church of Pika, True Methods member, for our MSP, and standards and compliance is very important, with just operational stability and maturity of our business. And so it all is coming together like this really well. So
Perfect. Dean, if you want to go ahead. Oh, you're muted, Dean. Sorry. There you go.
With that video on, you can tell immediately.
Uh-huh.
My name's Dean Murray. I'm a solutions architect with CDW. My role is to help customers protect their most sensitive data within Office 365. Started out working at Microsoft for about 14 years and then moved to CDW for a first stint, where I helped launch a BPOS practice, which was the predecessor to Microsoft 365 back then. I went off to do startups and other things, and then went to Sirius and was acquired again by Microsoft, by CDW. Sorry.
Also, Sirius alumni.
All right, Rich. So yeah, today I work with customers from in professional services engagements from anywhere from 100 seats up to about 350,000 seats. So and it's really focused around security, tenant hardening with Microsoft 365. So we're looking forward to working with Simeon Cloud and looking at the options within this. We definitely focus on CIS controls today, so we're excited with this release.
And I will say, Dean has been a catalyst for us to expedite this process, because Dean's always bugging us every call. When are you guys going to have the baselines ready?
He knows.
So, yeah, he's been pushing. So, and then Mark, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, hey everyone. Thanks for letting me join today. I want to say thanks for Simeon Cloud for letting me join the panel discussion today. I work for a company called TD SYNNEX, and I support the Microsoft Cloud practice. My area of focus on the platform is InTune, Azure AD, Windows 365 Cloud PCs, and modern deployment and management with InTune. So I was introduced to Simeon some months ago and immediately saw the value of the tool, because the partner community that I support, many of them are MSPs, and they've always been asking me, hey, is there a tool out there that can help automate InTune and help me keep up with it? And when I saw Simeon, I knew that was the tool. So I've already shared that with a lot of the partner community that I support. And again, thanks for letting me be here today.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we've got a great partnership with TD SYNNEX, and if you're an enterprise customer on the call today and you buy through TD SYNNEX, it's certainly something that feel free to go through them to actually purchase Simeon Cloud as well. So I guess our first conversation topic is just some clarity for the audience as to what the CIS security benchmark is and how it might differ a little bit from other security frameworks. So Rich, if you want to kind of walk us through that a little bit, and for those of us on the call that aren't fully versed on it.
Thank you, Ian. Will do. So hopefully I'm preaching to the choir, but the Center for Internet Security, also known as CIS, we are a global nonprofit. we're famous with cybersecurity professionals for a couple of areas. One is the CIS controls, which is a policy framework that helps organizations follow, measure, and really reach minimum security hygiene guidelines through the CIS Controls Implementation Group 1, which is recommended as basic cyber hygiene for all organizations. The other thing security professionals take advantage of in terms of CIS intellectual property are the CIS benchmarks. And CIS curates and publishes CIS benchmarks, which are secure configuration guidelines for many, many technologies. And as a nonprofit, we publish and make most of our IP available for organizations to freely use. The challenge that in the CIS benchmarks as well as controls, and I can talk all day about it, are considered worldwide as industry leading standards, recognized by many of the common frameworks within industry as an element of compliance. CIS makes benchmarks for Microsoft O365, we're going to get into today, but we also cover many other different technologies. And the design criteria for a CIS benchmark is an attack-tested set of guidelines that allow you to harden systems and mitigate the common attack surfaces and risks that are exposed by deploying many different common technologies like O365.
Perfect. So getting into the Microsoft 365 realm, and part of our next conversation topic is really there are a number of common security challenges with Microsoft 365. It is arguably the largest attack vector of any large enterprise because of Azure Active Directory and some of the other tools with InTune being, a new large part of larger enterprise deployments. So that said, I want to talk a little bit. I want you guys to kind of discuss a little bit about some of the challenges or some of potentially the vulnerabilities or defaults that are rolled out with the deployment of Microsoft 365. And maybe Dean, Nick, feel free just to start this off. But maybe Dean, I know you talk a little bit to your customers about the challenges of
Sure.
and potential vulnerabilities with Microsoft.
So the way that I try to politically put it with customers is that Microsoft defaults to maximum collaboration. And there are times that they trade that off for what we would look at for banks, hospitals, et cetera, as a really important security control that needs to be in there. And we use CIS controls quite a bit to look across that. Those map loosely to NIST 853. They map to other security controls, but CIS has done a pretty good job of looking directly at those security controls that are relevant to Office 365, et cetera. Rich can probably go into more of that, but I think it's really important that you do not start with a set of controls, or default settings out of Microsoft 365.
100%.
Nick, maybe you can add to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in the MSP space now for around 7 years or so not terribly long, but it's very consistent that we all have a checklist of some sorts when it relates to security hardening for 365, just because there's a lot of unique settings maybe for the tenant that we want to incorporate. But when Microsoft mentions things like secure by default, a lot of those are really restrictive settings on one end, where we're talking about large end user impact if we start flipping switches, versus a controlled rollout change control, which we'll probably get into a little bit later as well. But effectively, I've written guides about this for many years, and they've always been extremely lengthy checklists when it relates to CIS or mapping to NIST CSF or those types of things as well, just because there's a lot of controls, again, that have a lot of power, but we also want to be able to control that with the customer expectations that we have, and being able to communicate that appropriately so that we see better adoption for security concepts outside of just the controls that we can turn on, but also why this matters and why this is important for them to understand as well too. So for us, it's always been trying to get to a level state, and a lot of that we see upon a new customer onboarding. It's often a very much SOP level process for us to go in and standardize the tenant with our security baselines, and a lot of that in the past has typically been very manual, taking 3 to 5 hours to complete as well too, just to make sure we're making the appropriate tweaks across Exchange, SharePoint, InTune, Azure Active Directory, Entra ID now. So it's just a lot of manual work that comes with this as well.
Yeah, I was going to add, I want to say something because Derek represents a large part of the MSP community where you may not have a lot of staff and resources to manage a lot of tenants, and trying to implement some sort of security or some security defaults across a lot of tenants. Maybe Derek describes some of the challenges there as well, because I know a lot of CSPs or MSPs deal with this as an issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think the issue is the same for a lot of businesses that we work with, as well as the service providers, right? And that is the breakneck pace at which Microsoft changes features. That's always a challenge. And they do decide after a while, like, oh, I guess this thing wasn't as secure as we thought it was. The MFA situation is a good example, right? They're like, we want to do number matching, we want to stop doing the texting, and we want to get away from the less secure ways that we do MFA. But we're going to have to roll that out gradually across the user base, right? Because businesses need time to educate their customers and whatnot. But the smart organizations, the folks that are paying attention, they can go in and they can turn that on, quite some time ago. So it sort of takes time as things change. And then you've got to sort of play the game of like, did we turn that on? Are we using that? Oh, we turned it on a couple weeks ago, but Steve turned it off because it wasn't, there was a problem with, our accounting, whatever.
Did he though?
Yeah, so you're constantly struggling with like the no customer left behind problem, which is like, did we actually enable this setting for this customer?
Right.
Does everyone have the up-to-date, accurate best practices, and actually having confidence in that? And that's what I would always lose sleep of.
100%, right? And it ends up, it's hard to like, people kind of want to bash Microsoft and be like, oh, Microsoft this, blah, blah, blah. But the truth is that, it's also the onus is so much on us as service providers and the customer. And the truth is, and the truth is like, just the level of knowledge, right? Microsoft 365 is such a huge attack surface and attack vector, not because it's necessarily a weak product, but because we suddenly all have our most important things in those tools, right? And SharePoint Online, Exchange Online, So anyway, I'll continue babbling.
So Ian, can I jump in just a little bit more?
Absolutely.
Because I think this is really important. What are really the risks? And and I couldn't agree more with everything that Nick and Derek, Mark and Dean have said so far. All 100% couldn't agree more. More granularly and specifically what the risks are when operating Microsoft 365 is sensitive data leakage, privilege abuse, credential theft, and O365 makes it very easy to share files externally and collaborate outside of your organization. And whenever you do that, you're introducing risk to the environment for all of those reasons that I just described and the others described. So the threats are real. When you're introducing things on the cloud, you're widely exposing your attack surface, having configuration settings that are by default not appropriate. So you need a way to implement the CIS benchmarks. And, the CIS benchmarks are awesome. They will protect you from the common threats. However, the CIS benchmarks are not always easy to operationalize, shall we say. And that's really where Simeon Cloud is. I look at it like CIS is the cookbook, and Simeon Cloud is the chef. They enable you to operationalize the CIS guidance, to put it into action, to audit it, to monitor it, and to protect your organization.
Yeah, no, great. And one other thing I wanted to talk to hit on, because I talk to customers all day, every day, is this concept. Derek, you kind of mentioned it a little bit, is the ongoing changes within a tenant. And Jeff, maybe you've probably seen it more than anyone, Jeff, because you see how rapidly the configurations change and the drift that occurs just by the nature of the way Microsoft outputs. We see it at a very granular level because we extract the policies as code, and we can actually see syntax changes and property changes. But maybe, Jeff, you just want to talk a little bit about the drift that just naturally occurs with Microsoft 365.
Sure. It goes back to Microsoft constantly rolling out features, and you hit yes, I want to enable this feature in my tenant, or for another tenant, you hit no, I don't want to enable this feature, or sometimes they don't even ask you, and just magically a feature will be turned on in your tenant, but not in another tenant. And, being aware of these changes that are coming from Microsoft, like, for example, authentication strength being added to conditional access policies, but being not configured, is part of being a diligent, aware IT professional, knowing what's coming in naturally, and knowing what the weather is bringing in, is key to keeping your tenant secure. So Simeon picks up those changes, whether they're coming from a user saying, yes, I want to enable this feature in the tenant, or whether Microsoft has just silently turned on this feature in half of your tenants and not the other half. And all of a sudden, you've got half your tenants showing a delta against your desired baseline.
Yeah, the rapid change in the marketplace that Jeff is talking about, and the way the threat landscape continually evolves, means it's increasingly important to have that visibility into your settings, which Simeon Cloud really gives you that transparency. And it's there's still a lot of people in that mode, or a lot of organizations in that mode, where they set things up and forget it, set it and forget it. It doesn't work in cybersecurity. It's a continuous process, and that's what Simeon Cloud enables, to have that sort of continuous look at your environment and to manage that baseline drift that does occur.
I'm gonna actually bring something up to Mark specifically as well. Mark's dealing with a lot of customers that are rolling out InTune. We deal a lot with customers rolling out InTune. Obviously, InTune has a lot of configuration requirements. It also presents new risks that a lot of people that have traditionally just dealt with Office 365 may not be aware of. But maybe Mark, just talk to me about adding one more piece of complexity to the whole puzzle of Microsoft 365 with InTune. Maybe you've seen the frustrations and challenges associated with that, and making sure that it's also secure along with the rest of the suite.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. So I've probably been a part of probably 600 or 700 unique opportunities from a pre-sales perspective around Microsoft 365. And I saw some questions in the chat. I think it's important to understand that since the background for all these configurations and things that are happening in the background is the Microsoft platform, you're probably going to want to be having a minimum of M365 Business Premium and Azure Premium P2. Now, I got that just so if you guys want to understand what this looks like when you bring this tool on, because I can give you that experience, because I went through this with the engineer. I took my main tenant. I had a couple downstream tenants that I set up, and the whole process to set up Simeon probably took me about 5 hours. And that's working with the engineer David Nevins to help me set it up. But once it's set up, I can then take that baseline and I can spin it off to other end customers, or I can create baselines per vertical. Like a lot of times when I'm talking to partners, they're coming in and they're saying, hey, we want to use the Microsoft platform to meet the end customer security and compliance requirements. How can we do that? And it's a big platform. And so Simeon helps to rein that in and helps to subdivide out based on end user requirements, even per vertical. If it was me, that's what I would do. I'd say, hey, a school's going to have a baseline, a financial firm's going to have a baseline. I would create that through Simeon. I'd be 80% of the way for each of my templates, and then I would just go in and customize it for my end customers. And I see partners doing that today from a manual perspective. Simeon automates that.
Right. Okay, perfect. I was going to ask to you as well, Dean, in terms of things that you're seeing with Microsoft specifically. And I mean, I'll tell you from my experience right now, if I talk to a CIO or a CISO or a large MSP and I straight up ask them if they're confident in their current tenant configurations, they'll say it's actually like a skeleton in the closet, that they don't know because their team members are actively collaborating inside of the tenant. They're running random PowerShells to help automate things. They're turning off configurations to sort of, maybe the CEO doesn't want a certain, maybe he doesn't want to deal with MFA or something. But you end up with what people deem as, hey, we're going to make a great effort to adopt a framework, but then it fails on execution because it's not, either the controls aren't properly in place in the organization, or that there's employees that just don't want to sort of align or adopt the framework.
Let's be honest. It's not, following benchmarks and frameworks is not necessarily fun. It's not the most exciting part of someone's day. But it is mundane work, admittedly. People don't like doing it, but it's also critical. And that's where Simeon Cloud can kind of take that lift away from organizations and relieve that burden that no one likes doing to begin with.
And I think that's also important that we talk about why, the benchmark exists, right? You take CIS controls and you get this long, onerous sheet of things to do. And, you kind of get into it and you're like, man, I'll do this another day, right? And I feel like that's IT's biggest problem. That's the biggest differentiator. I draw this Venn diagram when I talk with customers about, this is what IT does, and over here, this is what cybersecurity does. They overlap right little in that little one spot, right? So IT can't take care of cybersecurity the way it needs to, but the benchmark the benchmarks for me are very prescriptive, right? And so it's a lot easier to use that as a guidance than just saying, go implement group one.
Yeah. And
Absolutely.
Dean, with all the rollouts you guys have done at CDW, have you seen anything that's been really effective in terms of getting an organization to adopt or implement transformation or change to properly implement a framework?
Well, today, we're documenting this. We've got a spreadsheet, or we've got everything, things with controls in there, and we're giving that to customers, but that becomes static. And then our recommendations today out of this are, hey, go in and do a quarterly review of what's going on. You need to come back and, set up your governance team, et cetera, to look at what changes are there. There's a lot of details that are there. What excites me about this, as you get CIS controls in this, is the opportunity to at least, I would say, get 80% of the way there. I don't expect this to be 100%. I don't expect conditional access controls or maybe some of these other controls where you're going to have to go in and use a human brain to look at that for a while. But if I could get 80% of the way there with this, I would be ecstatic. I'm looking at this as a tool to help us, number one, automate, as Mark mentioned, where you can get, particular baselines for particular verticals. And then number two, I can start to track what changes. as you guys mentioned. So I can look at, what's going on, what settings are updated from Microsoft, or what settings are updated within the teams.
Awesome, Dean. And I always like to, look at the big picture. So why is all of that important? It's important for your cyber hygiene, obviously, but it's also important for organizations that need to demonstrate compliance to many different frameworks, HIPAA, PCI, FedRAMP, whatever, your thing is. You need that demonstration for compliance to those frameworks. And which is really important in general, but also cyber insurance is a thing now, and it's been a thing for a while. And the cyber insurance organizations have matured in their offerings and their actions. And I have seen more and more cyber insurance claims denied because the organization isn't able to demonstrate that they've taken best practice measures. And that can be a real problem for organizations, and unfortunately, insurance is designed to send money one way, and it's not in your direction. But if you can demonstrate and, in the unfortunate event, case, if an event does happen, this really gives you what you need to work with, your insurance organizations and demonstrate that proper compliance and best effort, which is required by those organizations for payment.
Yeah, I was actually going to mention that we do talk to a lot of customers that have been denied an insurance claim or are dealing with that right now because somebody turned off a critical configuration. So that is becoming a bigger issue. Let's see. I was going to ask maybe Rich, if you want to talk a little bit about what's changed since 1.0 and 2.0.
From a CIS controls perspective?
Correct.
Okay, yeah. So, CIS, we're mission focused, and, we have an amazing group of professionals that curate these recommendations. And we're constantly trying to evolve in two ways. One is to always be cognizant of the current threat landscape and be, aware of that and modifying our offerings to, to appropriately defend against that current threat landscape. So in the controls specifically, we need to evolve those recommendations accordingly. And one of the big efforts that we've made is to make the CIS controls more consumable and easier to follow and for organizations, because it can be overwhelming. And I think Dean pointed that out and others that, where do I start? Where do I, what's the path? So what CIS has done is try to create a roadmap of basic cybersecurity hygiene within the controls by breaking them up into implementation groups that are measurable. You can track your progress, and it gives you that proper protection that you need and a roadmap to get there.
And on that, one of sorry, I've got I need a glass of water. I've got a terrible cough. But one question to ask you is CIS versus NIST versus NIST versus even NIST 2, which will be rolling out in Europe this next year. Maybe just talk a little bit about the differences and what's your adoption level in Europe compared to some of the other frameworks.
Yeah. First off, and this is probably Rich McGraw, not CIS speaking, all the frameworks are great. They all have the right intentions, and, pick your favorite one and follow it and, and get after it. If it's not CIS, so be it, but you need something. And what's cool about the CIS framework and the way I described implementation groups is many organizations that are required to comply to, say, NIST, they will actually use the CIS controls as their guide because it's easy to follow and measure. and track your progress, and then do mappings out to those other frameworks like NIST, like ISO, and so we have very, very wide adoption worldwide, and as such, we are involved in a lot of things worldwide. And one of those things is the new regulation coming up in the EU. I think it kicks in April of next year, where organizations have in the EU have new requirements to follow in the form of the NIS2 framework. And CIS has been involved in that, and we're part of that discussion. In fact, the NIS2 regulations in the EU specifically call out CIS and recommend CIS in the journey for NIS2 compliance, which is really exciting. I could talk about this stuff all day, and probably no one wants to hear it. But if you're not familiar, the NIS2 is a directive in the EU to really come up with a common level of cybersecurity across the union. And CIS is involved in a couple of ways. We're recognized as a source of standards that can help comply with the NIS2 requirements. And very specifically, in Article 18 of NIS2, entities should take into account relevant standards and guidelines. And that specifically references the CIS controls, which is probably more than anyone really wanted to know or needs to know, but there it is.
I think,
Right. Go ahead, Jeff.
one thing just to reiterate that is really key to this is the whole notion of making an effort. Some standard is better than no standard. Having consistency and making an effort at having a consistent standard applied is infinitely better than setting things up and hoping for the best. The risk that you expose yourself to, not just through insurance denial, but through something actually happening, and through key person risk and knowledge loss, and all these things that could happen. Making some effort will prevent it in 99% of cases.
Misconfiguration is still the biggest attack point overall, next to phishing.
To add a little bit to maybe a little bit of real world on what Rich added there, from a CIS perspective, we started earlier with, I think, CIS 1.2 or earlier than that, even on, putting together a list. The list of additional security items that we had was longer at that point, and every time that CIS keeps upgrading, more of my little add-on extra value adds keep disappearing because CIS keeps adding those controls in as standard controls that they recommend. So there's definitely a great team there that's doing work to continue to modify that, to continue to close security gaps.
Yeah, it takes time. Probably everyone wishes we could do it faster, including ourselves. But we do try to continuously improve. One of the unique benefits that we have from our perspective is we operate a SOC, and we collect net flow data from state and local governments across the whole United States. Funded by DHS, we also help secure the elections infrastructure. And as such, we have a daily view into the current landscape. We do threat hunting, we do incident response. So we're not in a theoretical organization. We see the threats and we respond to them, and we adjust our content accordingly.
Damn it, Rich! You stole a lot of my next comment. Was going to be
Sorry,
talking about,
no.
That's one of the things I love about what your team does. And the threat-informed defense, I think, is so important. And I think there's been a little comment, chat dialogue going on about when things conflict, advice conflicts, right? And the primary reason advice conflicts is because of the threat-informed, actions that folks take. And the truth of the matter is, if you want to spend a little bit of waste a little bit of your life and go read the Microsoft Docs website, their internal guidance also frequently will conflict. And really what you've got to do is you got to decide what's most important and what's best for your environment, right? And that should be sort of part of your strategy and your planning as you're developing and building your cybersecurity programs.
Just a tiny bit further to that is there's always going to be exceptions. Exceptions exist. Yeah. They're real, and they're going to continue to exist. So you need to just understand that risk, recognize it, and protect yourself as best as you can for those risks that you understand. And the CIS controls will help you add extra layers of what we call defense in depth. So if you have a risk, and and it's mandatory, you can't, in the short term you can't resolve that exception. Let's build an extra layer of defense around that system, and knowing that risk and accepting it, and just doing everything we can to protect it. But you have to be aware of it first.
Great stuff. A quick thing. I'm just gonna talk a little bit before we get into Q&A. I know there's a number of questions in the chat, but I want to address some of those. But I did want to talk to, I guess, Nick. This would probably be a good one for you. As far as how, a lot of people on the call may not be familiar with the challenges of course, configuring in a tenant that has toggles and switches, things in the various Microsoft portals, versus using automation and tooling with something like Simeon Cloud. I don't want to make this a commercial about Simeon Cloud, but there's not a lot of good solutions in the market to manage or put controls on top of Microsoft 365. I know you've had a lot of experience trying different methods. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about that and what you've done to kind of solve some of these challenges and implement a framework that actually has some governance controls on it.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the past, I think a lot of us, when we start to look at these checklists, we think about automation just to save time, especially on tenant onboardings, those types of things. And so immediately you kind of go to something that's familiar, like PowerShell, for instance, for a lot of us. And that's very challenging because the command lists are changing all the time. And, there's a lot of breakdowns when we talk about trying to mold everything yourself from that layer. But then additionally, at a previous MSP I was working at as well, we tried to institute Microsoft DSC, which I would consider the most comparable, if you want to call it a competitor to Simeon in any way. And that specifically took us over, for the first time, it took us over 8 hours to get one tenant implemented. And when you do that, if you follow Microsoft's white paper to do that, you're also spinning up a virtual machine, which is costing you around $70 a month as well too. So it's not exactly a cost-effective solution for the automation for all the things that you're running, and you have to get acclimated to new tooling that you've probably not been exposed to, like Microsoft Azure DevOps, and things like that, because that's how they're configuring the pipeline. So this is where Simeon is kind of masking all of that back-end work for you with a tenant configuration that you're looking to set up. And I know Mark mentioned took about 5 hours to get kind of configured on the tenant, and it has its own learning curve as far as just understanding what all the telemetry is coming from and mapping things to a baseline. But it's so powerful in the sense of just generally taking that snapshot. A lot of us like to use the term of golden image because that's familiar from legacy deployments, but this is truly what it's doing. And what I love about it also is that we are able to then take a snapshot, understand the drift within the tenant, but also have a gap analysis on, when I onboard a new customer, what does this tenant look like? And if I'm not an MSP out there, if I'm an enterprise customer just using this tenant, it's really great for change control, because I can simply map out in one staging environment the changes that would be pushed out. I can see the end user impact, and then I can widely broadcast communications or a rollout strategy around that change, which is largely a huge big issue when we talk about security controls as well. I keep reiterating this, but any of us that know when we make those changes, it's a pretty big deal to end users, especially if it's disruptive to their workflows. And if they haven't been communicated to, it's often a lot of help desk tickets to yourself and a lot of downtime from a business perspective, which is truly what we're trying to avoid with a lot of these things too. So just from a security configuration standpoint, the other thing I like from some Simeon is that there's a lot of depth. A lot of tools out there go pretty surface level with the amount of configurations that you can do, and you often have to piecemeal like 20 different tools together to be able to get the output that you want from that. Versus Simeon, I mean, we're talking about granular controls across Exchange, Intune, SharePoint, OneDrive, Active Directory, everything within the Microsoft suite. So with that in place, there's a lot of benefit to be granular with your customizations, and especially with the change control and drift that comes over time. So ultimately, it's saving us a lot of time. The ROI behind the tool for us is not just limited to customer onboarding, it's also including drift. And we haven't even kind of discussed the other benefit of the tool, which is app packaging, which is kind of a different webinar, I think, but it's a whole nother time savings and also security related because of the patching that comes with application deployments and management as well. So lots of great tooling there with tools.
And if I may jump in too, like I think one of the other biggest benefits is you don't need an expert in PowerShell or automation to actually use this tool to be very beneficial, right? You can set up sort of what we've done is set up our baseline tenant, right? And then you can go in and use the GUI, and you can go through, InTune, and you can go through Azure AD and click and do all the policies you want. And then you can sort of suck them out of that baseline tenant and then apply them to your customers. So, to me, that's much more viable when you don't have experts on your team. There's a lot of fantastic resources out there. Shout out to Cyberdrain and Kevin and what he does, and some other organizations. But I just cringe. And when I talk to him, it's like, oh, just download this PowerShell from the internet. And I'm like, no, don't download PowerShells from the internet and run them unless you 100% know what they're doing, right? And we got so many, organizations that have, technicians that just are not experts, but are can type connect MS Online into PowerShell. So, that's to me, like
enough to be dangerous.
Right. That's a much better benefit that we don't really talk about frequently.
And sort of adjunct to all of that, and when I engage with MSPs, which is often in my role, when you're and Nick talked about bringing on a new customer, taking management of someone else's tenant. When you do that, you're adopting risk. Right? You're responsible for those settings. So when you're, taking on that client, what risk are you accepting? How do you know what where your gaps are and how much work that's going to take as an MSP to shore up the ship, so to speak. And tools like Simeon can really give you that look into what are my challenges bringing on this client, what are the risks, and is this going to potentially make me look bad because on the second day that I take responsibility, they have a data breach and that looks bad at me.
And yeah, I'll actually speak to that because I speak with a lot of MSPs that are looking into Simeon Cloud. And one of the things that always scares me is when I talk to an MSP that's recently adopted M365 as a competency, they'll come straight to me and say, hey, we're supporting several customer tenants, but we don't have any M365 experts on staff. We hope we're doing a good job. And
not a lot of value there.
Oh, and I'm just thinking, wow, what risk you're putting on yourself and the customer.
You are.
And yes, you can implement a tool like Simeon Cloud and it will get you, as you mentioned, Rich, configurations are like the number two, just behind phishing. It's like misconfigurations is the next biggest threat. So you can solve a lot of problems by having a proper baseline that's been implemented and proper security controls, but still, having an MSP practice with Microsoft 365 and not having enough knowledge in-house to support those customers is a pretty big pretty big risk for a small business like an MSP.
And even like for the MSPs and service providers on the call, an exceptional prospecting tool as well, right? You can go ahead and run this and get a report, and actually see some of the landmines that you might end up having to deal with. So that itself is invaluable.
Running that baseline is and seeing that you're actually building an opportunity roadmap, right? I mean, that's what it comes down to. When back at CIS, when I did security architecture reviews, it was valid technical work, but it was also really just building a roadmap for projects to solve those issues, and that's an opportunity for MSPs.
Yeah, that's important to note, and Dean obviously knows this as well, but the idea of running health check reports or assessments out of something like Simeon Cloud, looking at the gap analysis between a current state of a tenant and what the desired state is, or what the like a CIS framework, there's so much project work available so easily just by using that kind of a report, to go to a customer and say, hey, we found 50 policies that you should be rolling out into your Microsoft environment. This is what it's going to take for us to implement these.
Putting your head in the sand is a strategy, but it's not a good one, and you can't unsee that report. Once you expose that report, you may have been very comfortable with your head in the sand, but you can't unsee that report. And now that exists, and it's your responsibility to take action as a custodian of your organization and the data you protect.
Okay, we've right. Only got. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just saying we briefly touched on the shared responsibility model, right? But just disclaimer: not a lawyer. Seek advice from a professional legal advisor. I haven't yet seen some of the horrible lawsuits that I think will be coming. As customers are breached, but also we're just not, the public isn't always privy to the nasty stuff behind the curtains. But Microsoft explicitly says in their licensing and service delivery that the CSP partner, the cloud service provider that sold the licenses, is actually responsible for configuration of a lot of them, right? The customer is responsible for securing their data. Partner is responsible for securing the implementation. And so, there's a lot of liability that's actually there, regardless of whether you want to recognize it or not. And it's not necessarily something that you can just transfer to cyber insurance, because more and more now that's the question, right? Have you done the configurations properly? Is this actually done? Do cares the term they use, right? And it's every time I talk to lawyers and that term comes up, it's one of those ones that like, oh, that's so much fun for the first year associates to like argue, because what is the right level of care that you're taking for your clients? And then, sort of in that tangent too, I think from the service provider standpoint, if you're using this tool, it's an option to upsell and cross-sell, and you should be charging for it, please. And then it also is going to build stickiness, right? And gives you even a little bit of a moat between you and your competitor, right? You use these reporting as part of your VCIO cadence, and you're talking with the customer about these things and helping them identify and decide how they're going to manage that. And then you're building project work down the road as well.
You're accelerating the obvious goal of becoming a trusted advisor for that organization, and it really shortcuts that process, which can be long and arduous.
Yeah, those words there are just so key, right? Like there's so many managed service providers who are resellers, but building a trusted relationship with your customer is key to being a successful managed service provider.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, we're at the last 4 minutes. We don't have a lot of time for Q&A, but one of the main questions that people have asked is Simeon Cloud, what's the availability of the CIS baseline in Simeon Cloud? And we are rolling this out to there's a handful of people in a sort of a preview ring right now. If you want to be added to that group, just email support@simeoncloud.com. We'll add you to that as well. But this is it's rolling out. It's imminent. It's our team is sort of dotting the I's and crossing the T's at the moment, but as mentioned, there is a preview group, so feel free to email us or email whoever your salesperson is or your sales engineer at Simeon Cloud, and we'll get you into the preview group. Let me see. Has anyone else on any of the other presenters seen any questions in the chat that you guys want to respond to? I know you guys have done a pretty good job keeping up with it while we've been going. Let's see.
While you look through that, go ahead, Ian.
Oh, I was going to say one question is, does Simeon Cloud use a golden image via tenant to copy baselines, or do the baselines exist in the product itself? Jeff, maybe you want to answer that because it's sort of both.
Sure. So essentially, our baseline that we offer is a golden image, and when you start using Simeon, you get a copy of that golden image. Unlike the golden images, of virtual machines, where actually maintaining what's in the golden image was a real pain in the butt, and frankly was the downfall of having golden images. You can see granularly right through the Simeon product what is in that golden image, and also on our documentation page. You get a copy of our golden image at the time that you become a Simeon customer, and you can then compare your copy of that golden image to any updates we make to our publicly available copy. So as we release the CIS 2.0 baseline, you'll be able to compare your existing Simeon baseline to the new CIS 2.0 Simeon baseline and use the Simeon tooling to just copy and move or copy the new configurations that you want into your own baseline. So that's really the power of Simeon, is that it gives you the ability to easily view everything that's in a tenant, compare it to everything that's in another set of configurations, and reconcile them at any point in time.
And just an FYI, Josh is going to be pasting a link to our GitHub docs, which is our help docs, configuration list, all that kind of stuff in the chat as well. So if you don't have that currently, it's something worth reviewing. There's a lot of helpful information there. I think we're at time. I mean, I'd love to keep chatting, but I know everyone else has jobs to go do. So appreciate it again. We will have a recording of this. We'll put it up somewhere that so you guys can access this later if you want. Other than that, look forward to our next webinar. We'll probably be having one sometime in early October, I believe. So we'll be in touch then. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you.